Welcome back to Think Design Works Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios, and what I have for you today is something slightly different than usual. We are going to talk about password management, how to store your passwords, and some alternate ways. The reason for this is twofold. On one hand, it's getting warm outside, it's summer, and based on the previous years, we noticed that there's less interest for the more serious topics. We'll do some of those as well. This is also serious, but is more on the side from software development. The other one is also that I got a very interesting questions. I did a talk at a conference called The Developers about security for developers, inspired by our secure coding learning program. And in the end, one of the questions was, look, we've seen that there was a strong advice to use password managers, but then LastPass was hacked. And the question is, how are we safe? Where can we store our passwords? And this topic is fairly complex, but still very important for everyone. I'm mostly gonna assume that I'm discussing with developers, but if you do not have a developer background, you might also get something out of this. And also, I don't plan to discuss everything about password management because it's a very complex topic. If you want to learn more, please add questions in comments, because I'd be happy to answer some more things if they are requested. I'm just gonna talk about three things: fundamentals, password managers, and alternate password management. Some techniques that maybe you don't know and that could prove themselves quite useful. And I'm not going to talk about things like the risk analysis for different password managers. That's a very complicated thing, and we need a lot of time to go into it. And I'm not going to talk about the personal risk analysis on passwords. Just touch a little bit. So no, there are much more things to be discussed here. Biometrics, passwordless authentication, and so on. There's a lot here. And each of those has its own advantages, disadvantages, its own risk profile. So you can imagine we can get very quickly to some very complex things. Before we start, important caveat: be careful. This is not no advice that you should follow immediately. Instead, make your own analysis. It's important to understand what is possible, what is not, and think for yourself, your own context. Contexts are very different between people, and mostly this is not security advice, so be careful when applying it. Think about it. Okay, so let's move on. With this being said, let's talk a little bit of fundamentals. Basically, when we talk, still in 2024, I think the prevalent way of authenticating is with username, most of the times with the email address and a password. And the advice for passwords has been basically the same for years. You need to use long passwords. And by long passwords, honestly, more than 18, more than 23 characters, a mix of characters. I forgot to write this here, but yeah, it should be a mix of characters, and not only small characters, but also large, also symbols. Personally, I would prefer if more websites would allow for passphrases, which means long sentences with spaces and punctuation. Unfortunately, some websites don't allow certain symbols, don't allow spaces, which for the life of me, I can't understand why. So I would rather use passphrases if possible. Now, also passphrases have a bit of a downside, which is they may get easier to guess. They are long, they are memorable, because generally if it's a phrase that makes sense, you can remember it. Problem is if you use a quotation from a book or something like that, it could be easier to guess. So once again, make your own analysis. Probably ideally would be to not use very long passwords that are unmemorable and unreadable, at least for security. Well, readable, but very difficult to remember. But the problem is then, how do you remember them? You will need a tool, and we'll talk about tools in a moment. Okay, so you can see how complicated this can get. But generally speaking, long passwords, mix of symbols, small letters, caps, ideally should be a weird mix, numbers, symbols. Don't reuse passwords between websites, and the reason for this is websites get hacked all the time, and some passwords get dumped on the internet, and then attackers use those databases to try out different websites with the same email address. We no longer have a unique username now. We tend to have the same email address for multiple websites. And so they use the same email address with passwords. And try it, and maybe they get in. Don't store them on post-its around the office, particularly for businesses, but also at home, right? Don't store it on post-its that are around your home. And don't use identifiable things like things that people can find about you from social media, like your birthday, your place of birth, your favorite city, or things like that. And always, whenever possible, use multi-factor authentication. So enable the second factor. One way for this is SMS, so phone message. Problem with phone messages, they are hackable. They aren't encrypted. It's slightly more difficult to get them, of course, because you need to, as far as I understand, you need to tap into that communication line, and okay, it's not particularly easy, but depending on the risk profile for the website that you are dealing with, maybe you don't want this option. But you can use apps like Google Authenticator. There are a bunch of authenticators. Google Authenticator, I think, is the most well-known one, but it's not the only one. Or a hardware device like YubiKeys is actually the name. These are really nice devices. I wish more websites would use them. And they are kind of like a key you plug in, or you use Bluetooth to connect to your phone, and you can use them as a second factor. Basically plug them into your computer, and then you can, whenever you need a second factor, you authenticate with the device. You either push a button, or some of them actually have a fingerprint, and they provide a second factor from hardware. This is a really cool device, I think, and it stands the test of time. They've been around for years. Yeah, so it would be nice for more websites to support them, and maybe also to allow passwordless authentication with maybe a combination between your phone and this device, something like that. It should still be two factors. Another thing that you should do is to monitor breaches. I have at least 3 applications that offer to monitor breaches. I think they all take the data from the same website, so you can use, if you search a little bit for monitoring breaches, basically what happens, as I said, sometimes sometimes password emails and passwords, sometimes the passwords are encrypted or hashed, sometimes they are not, and these get dumped in various places on the internet, and there are websites monitoring for this. So one thing you can do is to sign up to one of these websites, use your email addresses that you use for authentication, and they would notify you every time there's a new breach that involves your email. And when you get an information about such a breach, the best thing to do is to change the password immediately. Okay. If you still have an active account there and so on. And now the problem is, if you've reused the password, it's likely that somebody will try it at some point. So if you reuse the password between multiple websites, you need to change the password on all those websites, ideally to something different. Be extra careful with sites that lead to identity theft and money loss. So here, I mean, first of all, your email address, because that's becoming more and more the central place and the pillar on which everything else stands. If your email address is breached, then there's no telling of what's happening, right? Attackers can change your email password, and then they can go on and change passwords for various websites, change the second factor authentication, and so on. So be very, very careful with this one. Then your bank application, typically in Europe, the security is fairly good for banking applications due to a lot of legal requirements and a lot of industry regulations, and that's really good. But you should still watch for this. And other websites that can lead to money loss are sites where you buy things, shopping sites like Amazon, like, if somebody breaches your Amazon password, it's likely they could order some things using your card. And yeah, there are various ways of dealing with that. Maybe don't save your card on websites, on smaller shopping websites. Just reintroduce it for every expense, or if you do save your card, it would better use the second factor for transactions, like ask you for confirmation when you make a transaction. That would be the best thing. However, not all websites do that, so yeah, be very careful. And of course, careful with phishing attacks and other stuff like that. As I said, it's a very complex topic and we won't go into everything. But I think what's important here is where do we store our passwords? If you want our passwords to be long, not to repeat themselves, to be difficult to remember, difficult to guess, all kinds of things, what can we do? Well, and this is where password managers come into place. And based on my analysis, we have a number of password managers, categories of password managers. We have operating system password managers. I think you have one on Windows, you have one in Mac OS. In Linux, there isn't one that's built in, but you can install additional tools. Then you have browsers. Every major browser has a password manager. You can use those. You have cloud-based, like LastPass, that I mentioned that was hacked a few years ago. There's OnePass. There are a bunch of those. BitLocker, I think. And then you have a bunch of, a few actually open source apps. The most well-known, at least for me, is KeePassX, which is an application that you can use to manage your passwords on your system. So you install it, you manage passwords there. Now, all of these stand somewhere in this triangle of convenience, security, and access. And what I mean by that is convenience. If you use something like KeePassX, it's likely that you won't have the passwords on your mobile phone. Whereas if you use, or if you use something in your OS, unless maybe Mac OS and iOS synchronize, there are various ways of synchronizing, okay? Browsers also might be able to synchronize between different instances, but by far the most convenient are the cloud-based ones, which store your encrypted vault in the cloud and allow you to sync from whatever device you need. So very high convenience. However, this makes cloud-based password management a target for potential attacks and breaches, like the ones that happened with LastPass. And it's also a matter of access. Where can you access those? Can you access them in a browser? Can you access them only in an application, on a specific device, and so on? So, a bunch of questions here. And depending on your passwords and what you're trying to do, how much access do you want to have? How convenient do you want things to be? You need to see where you are placed. The safest ones would be probably the ones that are stored on your hard drive, encrypted with a key that is perhaps stored on a different device. And so you can only unlock that vault by plugging in, let's say, a YubiKey or something like that. But the problem is, if you do all this, and the one question that I ask is, how far are you willing to go to protect your Netflix password? If we are talking about business-related passwords, if we are talking about email, bank account, shopping, these are maybe high-profile, higher risk kind of websites from this analysis. And for those, maybe it's worth having less convenience, less access, and more security. But for most other applications, it doesn't matter that much, right? I mean, okay, if somebody... Okay, social media is another one where it's important because people might post stuff that you don't like in your name, and then it's very hard to recover the account and all that. But when it comes to things like, I don't know, Netflix or other websites like this, or one-offs, or I don't know, unsplash.com, where I'm going to get some images. What does it matter? How far are you willing to go? Is it worth to have more convenience or would you rather go full security for everything? And this is your own analysis. This is something that you need to answer based on your context. Okay, so now that browsers can sync between them, between different instances, so your instance from your mobile can sync with your instance from your desktop, it still needs to go through a central place, so it will still touch servers in the cloud from whomever is doing this sync. In theory, everything is encrypted, so it's encrypted on the first device, it passes through the cloud, it goes to the second device where it's decrypted. But you know how these things are. Eventually, if they are stored, and we don't know if they are, no matter what what the companies are saying, we have no way of checking if they are storing this data or not. Eventually somebody might be able to steal those, eventually somebody might be able to break them, and so on. So there was always a bit of a question there. So now let's seeing this analysis. As you can see, none of these are perfect. Cloud-based offer highest level of convenience, highest level of access, but security is a bit, well, it depends on what they are doing. But on a general analysis, security will be lower than something that is in your OS, for example. Now, OS offers limited access, not as convenient because it's only in your on your laptop, for example. Higher security, but the problem with security here is since these things are implemented in the OS, they can become also a target for potential attackers. And if there are vulnerabilities here, they might be breached. It's less likely that you'll be affected by such a breach than cloud-based if you keep your systems up to date, but there's still a possibility. Open source apps, those don't offer the best, typically the highest level of functionality. But one thing you know is that the data is stored on your computer, it's encrypted with open algorithms, but you still might need to manage keys and stuff like that. So it becomes a little bit less convenient, less access, but maybe more secure. Okay, so this is a general analysis. Now, depending on the specific tools, that analysis kind of changes. But let's look at alternate ways of doing password management, which is what many people don't realize, that there are some, I would say, smart ways of dealing with this problem that might involve password managers, but in a different way. And let's look at that. The first one is called password cards, or QWERTY cards. So what is this? This is something, okay, so initially it was kind of a plastified card that you would order, you would get, and store it in your wallet, in your physical wallet. and use it in a very specific way with your passwords. But now there's also a way to generate this online, and probably if we search a little bit, we'll find some tools that would be able to generate such a QWERTY card offline. So what's this doing? Let's just take a look here. Basically what you have is a code. It's a replacement code. In this example, you have Q that is replaced with a exclamation mark, W with a K, small caps K, E with a large caps A, R with a 2, and so on. And so you generate this card. This card is unique to you because it's randomly generated. And it also have a spacebar code. In this example, the spacebar code is something like sh open parenthesis slash j3hq. And it's a combination of small caps and large caps, numbers, symbols. This is also unique to your card. Okay, and then for every website where you want to have a password, you create a password from 3 elements. First element is the spacebar code that I mentioned here. Second element is your master password, which means there's only one password that you need to remember, and is this master password. And the third one is a code for the website that you are using. In this example, if you create the password for Amazon.com, you would use the coded version of Amazon according to this generated QWERTY card. That would be, so A is dot, M is U, A is dot again, Z is R, O is Q, N is F. And you end up with a password that looks like sh open parenthesis slash j3hq, then your secret password, and .u.rqf. Okay, so if somebody, now let's assume somebody steals your card, they might be able to figure out the first part and the last part of the password, but they don't know the middle part, because the middle part is your master password. And ideally this master password you would remember, not write anywhere, not do anything with it, just remember it. If somebody steals your password, let's say they manage to decrypt your password from Amazon, they would end up with this. So let's say they know what this is about. So they know the first part, they know the last part is about Amazon, and they know the spacebar code, and they know your master password. Okay, so could they apply it to another website? Well, partially, because this is a simple substitution cipher. So if it has exactly the same letters, A, M, Z, O, N, then yes, they would be able to break this, but they would have to know the method first. However, that's quite strange, you know. I mean, they would have to steal a lot of your passwords to be able to decrypt the whole thing. And hopefully, if you are monitoring breaches, by the time you'll realize, you'll generate a new QWERTY card, you'll change your passwords, and everything will be good again, and maybe change your master password. Okay, so this is one way. The passwords are strong. Unless you know the method, or you can guess the method. It's hard to, even if you decrypt, if an attacker decrypts your password, it's hard to get to another website. So I would say pretty safe, right? And you only have to remember one thing, but you have to keep this plastic bar in your wallet. Keep it with you whenever you need to input anything, take it out and type the password. The second one is called the password card, and this is a bit more convoluted in a way. You basically generate a grid. It's a 9 by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by 9 grid. And you have ABC, so you have the alphabet on top, you have the numbers on the left from 1 to 9. And in the middle you have 3 letters for each, 3 symbols for each intersection. And once again, these are unique. You can generate them. You can generate multiples and just use one of them. If you don't want the website to know which one you picked, generate 10 of those, download all of them, but then only use one. And the way you deal with this is the way you store your password is for every website, you decide on a password based on the coordinates in this grid. So for example, you'd say my password for Amazon.com is AJKL followed by 6 PQR followed by 5E and by 2H. Okay, and this gives you the coordinates in the grid, and you can go exactly to those and reconstruct your password. And in this case, you can use a password manager to store these coordinates instead of storing the actual password. And maybe somebody can make some type of extension that can translate between those two. Okay. And in this way, once again, you need this card printed. You need to have it with you. You plastify it. You keep it in your wallet. Maybe you keep 3 of them, but you know which one you're using. So in case somebody steals your wallet, they don't know which one to use. And anyway, if they steal your card, you have separately stored the actual coordinates that give you the password. And in case they breach the password manager, they also need this card to get your passwords. But, okay, if we go to our previous slide here, and if we look at convenience, security, and access, these are slightly more secure, less convenient, but, and okay, access is pretty good, but not as much. If you forget your wallet, if you leave your wallet in another room, you have to get up, go there, take your wallet, take out the card, and so on. On the other hand, on security, pretty good, because you generally know how to protect your wallet. Okay, it's typically easier to do that than to protect digital information. So that's the analysis. And anyway, I thought that we could look at these alternate password managers. I think these are very interesting. Honestly, I haven't used these, but I'm seriously considering using those. And my favorite one would be, I think, password cards in combination with a password manager. I think that's a bit easier to use. Now, what does this say about the other methods like biometrics, uh, social authentication, like sign up with Google and stuff like that? Again, it depends. Biometrics, it's pretty strong. You have your fingerprint with you everywhere or your face. Problem is exactly that. You have your fingerprint or your face with you everywhere. So if somebody steals you your phone, if they are near you, they can unlock it. Also, biometrics, the unfortunate thing with biometrics is that they are like a password that you cannot change. Biometrics, the older way of thinking about biometrics in security was that biometrics should be what identifies you. So instead of a username, not instead of a password. But we ended up using biometrics as a password, which I guess it works in combination with other things. Security from your bank tends to be more complex than what we are discussing here, and they take into account multiple things, patterns of usage and the other such stuff. So yeah, it's hard to, you cannot discuss these things in isolation. Social login, also the problem is, I think social login is extremely useful for websites where it doesn't really matter if somebody steals your data. But for those that are more sensitive, you might want to use something else. Okay. And remember, when you use biometrics, you are counting on your device security, that it's actually storing it separately and so on. When you are using social login, you are counting on that third party to make the authentication as secure as they can. So once again, very difficult to say, different levels of analysis. But I hope in this video I showed you two alternate ways of doing password management, and maybe for those websites that can lead to money loss, to identity theft, maybe for those you can use one of these methods, and for the others you can defer to biometrics or to social login or to a normal password manager, whichever one you prefer. Okay. Once again, not security advice, very important. You have to make your own analysis. But I just wanted to raise awareness that there are alternate methods of doing this, and a bit of an analysis on how to think about these things. That's it from me today. Thank you kindly for the view. And until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart. See you next Saturday.